What if one single paparazzi moment could completely change how the world sees a royal figure forever? Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, has lived most of her life under constant public attention. Every move she makes, every appearance, every moment in public has been watched, photographed, and analyzed. But recently, something happened that brought her name back into global headlines once again. And what was captured has sparked confusion, speculation, and a wave of intense debate across the internet. But here's the strange part. The more people look at it, the less clear the truth actually becomes. And by the end of this video, you may start questioning everything you thought you understood about this situation. Sarah Ferguson is no stranger to public scrutiny. From her time connected to the British royal family to years of media attention, she has lived a life constantly surrounded by cameras. And over time, she has learned one difficult truth. In the world of public figures, privacy is never guaranteed. Recently, report began circulating that Sarah Ferguson was photographed during what appeared to be a private, unguarded moment. At first, it didn't seem like anything unusual. Just another public appearance. Just another routine moment captured by paparazzi. But then, everything changed, because those images began to spread online. And suddenly, a simple moment turned into a global talking point. Within hours, social media exploded. Headlines appeared everywhere. Different versions of the story began circulating, and people began reacting instantly without knowing the full context of what actually happened. Some called it shocking. Others said it was completely harmless. And this is where things start to become complicated, because everyone is looking at the same moment, but nobody is seeing it the same way. And here is something important most people forget. A photograph does not tell a full story. It captures only a fraction of a second. No sound, no context, no explanation. Just a frozen moment in time, removed from everything that came before and after it. And in that silence, the human mind begins to fill in the gaps. That is where interpretation takes over reality. And that is exactly what seems to be happening here. As more people examined the situation, a different perspective slowly started to emerge. Some observers suggested that what looked dramatic at first glance may not actually be dramatic at all. Instead, it could simply be an ordinary moment, captured at the wrong angle, at the wrong time, and completely stripped of its context. And just like that, the entire narrative begins to shift. This is not the first time something like this has happened. In fact, it happens constantly in the world of celebrities and public figures. A single image spreads faster than the truth behind it. A headline forms before facts are confirmed. And once a story goes viral, it becomes extremely difficult to reverse the first impression, because people don't remember the full explanation. They remember the emotion of the first thing they saw. And behind every viral moment, there's always a real person. Someone living under constant visibility. Someone who cannot control when cameras appear. And someone who has to deal with interpretations of moments they never explained in the first place. That is the reality of life in the public eye. And Sarah Ferguson is no exception. So when people say, Sarah Ferguson exposed by paparazzi, the real question becomes, what does exposed actually mean? Is it a real revelation of something hidden, or just a story built from fragments, shaped by attention and amplified by repetition across the internet? Because sometimes, the most viral stories are not about what actually happened, but about what people believe might have happened. And that difference changes everything. So now the question is yours. Was this truly a shocking exposed moment, or just another misunderstanding that grew into a viral story? Let your thoughts be known in the comments. And if you want more deep breakdowns like this, stay tuned, because not every story that goes viral is as simple as it first appears. But there's another layer to this story that most people completely overlook. Because in today's world, it doesn't take much for a moment to become a headline. It doesn't take confirmation. It doesn't take context. It only takes attention. And once attention enters a story, everything starts to change. Now suddenly, people are not just looking at an image. They are building theories around it. They are adding meaning to it. They are turning seconds of footage into full narratives. And that is exactly how stories like this grow out of control. Because once a version of the story spreads, it becomes difficult to pull it back into reality. Even if new information appears later, most people never see it. They only remember the first impression. And that first impression is often the most dramatic version of the story. In the case of Sarah Ferguson, this is where public opinion begins to split even further. Some people insist the moment proves something significant. Others strongly disagree and say it is completely blown out of proportion. And both sides believe they are right, because both are reacting to incomplete information. But here is a deeper truth behind situations like this. We are living in an era where perception often moves faster than reality. A single frame can travel across the world in seconds. A single headline can define a narrative before the full story is even understood. And once that narrative is set, it becomes a version most people accept, even if it was never fully accurate to begin with. And that is why stories involving public figures, especially those involving paparazzi, always spread so quickly. Because they create curiosity, they create emotion, and they create the feeling that something important has been uncovered, even when the reality may be far more ordinary. But there is something else worth considering here. Behind every viral moment, there's a real human being dealing with the consequences of that attention. Not just the headlines, not just the comments, but the pressure of being constantly interpreted by millions of people based on moments that may never have been meant to be public in the first place. And that raises a difficult question. At what point does public interest become public misunderstanding? At what point does observation turn into assumption? And at what point does a simple moment stop belonging to the person living it and start belonging to the internet? Because once that shift happens, there is no real control over the outcome anymore. And that is the part most people never see. They only see the headline. They only see the viral clip. They only see the reaction. But they rarely see how quickly a normal moment can turn into something entirely different once it enters the digital world. So when we step back and look at the situation again, we are left with the same question. Was this truly an exposed secret moment? Or was it simply a case of the internet doing what it does best, turning uncertainty into a story, and a story into something much bigger than the moment itself? And maybe the real answer is not found in the image, but in how quickly we choose to believe what we see. And this is where things become even more interesting. Because once a story reaches this level of attention, it no longer stays as a simple moment. It becomes a conversation, a debate, and sometimes even a controversy that grows beyond the original event itself. People start rewatching the same images. They start slowing them down, zooming in, analyzing every detail, looking for meaning in places where there may not have been any intention at all. And the more this happens, the more the original context disappears. What remains is interpretation. And interpretation is never the same for everyone. Some will see something dramatic. Others will see something completely ordinary. But both will feel confident in what they believe, because the mind naturally tries to complete missing information. That is how human perception works. We do not just see images. We explain them to ourselves instantly. And once that explanation is formed, it becomes very difficult to change. Even if new context appears later, it rarely has the same emotional impact as a first impression. And this is exactly why stories involving public figures often become so powerful online. Because they combine two things that always capture attention: familiar faces and uncertain moments. And when those two combine, the internet fills in the rest. But there is still a bigger question underneath all of this. Why do stories like this spread so quickly in the first place? The answer is simple, but also uncomfortable. Because uncertainty creates curiosity, and curiosity drives attention. And attention is the currency of the digital world. So the moment a clip or image feels unclear or shocking, it spreads faster than anything fully explained. But speed does not always mean accuracy, and viral does not always mean true. In fact, most viral moments exist in a space between reality and interpretation, and that is where misunderstanding grows. In the case of Sarah Ferguson, what we are really seeing is not just a single moment being discussed, but a larger pattern of how modern media behaves, where images become headlines, headlines become stories, and stories become assumptions that spread across millions of people, all within hours. And once that cycle begins, it becomes almost impossible to slow down. Because every share, every comment, every reaction adds another layer to the narrative, until eventually the original moment becomes secondary, and the story built around it becomes the main focus. But if we step back for a moment and remove all the noise, we are often left with something much simpler. A brief moment, a single frame, and a wide range of interpretations built around it. So maybe the real lesson in this situation is not about what was captured, but about how quickly meaning can be created without full understanding, and how easily perception can replace reality in the digital age. Because at the end of the day, the question is not just what happened in that moment, but how many different versions of that moment were created after it. And that is where the real story begins. And maybe that is the real takeaway from this entire situation. Not the image itself, not the headlines, not even the reactions online, but the way a single moment can travel so far and become so many different versions of itself along the way. Because in today's world, stories don't just end when the moment is over. They continue in comments, in headlines, in opinions, and in assumptions that spread long after the original event is gone. And Sarah Ferguson's situation is just one example of something much bigger. The speed of information has changed, but the accuracy of understanding has not always kept up with it. So when we look back at moments like this, it becomes less about what was captured and more about how quickly meaning was created around it. And maybe the most important question is not whether this was truly an exposed secret moment, but why the world is so quick to believe that it might be. Because sometimes the story says more about the audience than it does about the moment itself. So now the question is yours. Do you think this was reality being revealed, or perception taking control of the story? Let your thoughts be known in the comments. And if you want more deep breakdowns like this, make sure to subscribe. Because not every story that goes viral is a story that actually happened. And when you really think about it, this is not just one story about one moment. It is a reflection of how quickly the world reacts before it understands. Because in today's digital age, the first version of a story is almost never the most accurate one, but it is almost always the most powerful. And once that version spreads, it becomes the one most people remember, not because it is confirmed, but because it arrived first and traveled the fastest. And that is exactly what makes situations like this so complicated. A moment happens, a frame is captured, a headline is created, and before any real explanation can catch up, millions of people have already formed an opinion. Some believe it is something important. Others believe it is completely harmless. But very few ever pause long enough to ask the most important question. What is missing from this picture? Because sometimes what is not shown matters more than what is. And that space between what is seen and what is understood is where most misunderstandings are born. In the case of Sarah Ferguson, the conversation will likely continue online. Different interpretations will keep spreading. Different opinions will keep forming. And the story will keep evolving, depending on who is telling it. But the original moment itself remains unchanged. A single snapshot in time. Frozen, silent, and open to interpretation. So as the story fades in and out of online attention, it leaves behind one final thought. In a world where everything can be recorded, shared, and judged within seconds, understanding becomes more important than reaction. Context becomes more important than speed. And truth often requires more patience than most people are willing to give. So maybe the real lesson here is simple. Not everything that trends is fully understood, and not everything that looks dramatic tells the full story. So now, as you think about everything you've seen and heard in this video, ask yourself one final question. Are we witnessing reality as it is, or reality as it is being interpreted in real time? Because sometimes, the biggest story is not what happened. It is how quickly we decided what it meant. And with that, the story is yours to decide.